This lecture is entitled Histology 1. As you know, as we discussed earlier, histology is the study of tissues. A tissue is a group of cells that have similar structure and perform a common or related function. Histology is the study of the different tissues in the body. There's 4 types of tissues. There's epithelial tissue. The purpose of epithelial tissue is to cover a surface. That should be a surface inside the body, such as the inside of the stomach or inside of the small intestines, or it could cover the exterior surface, such as the skin. The second type of tissue is connective tissue that provides support for the body. The third type of tissue is muscle tissue that produces movement in the body. And the fourth type of tissue is nerve tissue or nervous tissue, and that is for controlling parts of the body. These next slides show some diagrams of where you would find some of these types of tissues. For example, nervous tissue is found in the brain and spinal cord and in the nerves. Muscle tissue is found attached to bones. It's found in the muscles of heart. It's found in the walls of hollow organs. Epithelial tissue forms boundaries between different environments. So this would be the lining of a cavity inside the body, such as the lining inside of the stomach, the inside of the respiratory tract, the lining of the kidneys, the bladder, and it could be the exterior surface of the skin or the epidermis. And finally, this connective tissue that supports, protects, and binds other tissues together. Examples of connective tissue would be bone, tendon, fat. Even blood is a connective tissue. We'll start by looking at epithelial tissues. And in general, there's epithelial tissue can be considered in 2 categories. There's covering or lining epithelial and glandular epithelial. The difference between the two is basically the function of the tissue. In covering or lining epithelial, they're on surfaces. External surfaces would be like the skin, internal surfaces like the inside of the stomach. They serve as lining for a cavity inside the body or for the exterior of the body. Epithelial tissue can provide several functions, including protection, such as the skin, absorption, which it absorbs minerals and substances from one side of the epithelial tissue to the other. It can filter, it can excrete, secrete, and also it has sensory reception because it's highly innervated with nerves. Let's look at some of the distinguishing characteristics that epithelial tissue has. And these 5 characteristics apply to all epithelial tissue. First of all, the cells have polarity. They have a top and a bottom, and the top is different than the bottom, have different functions, and the top has different functions than the bottom. So the top surface, or the apical surface, is the upper free side, and it's exposed to the inside of the cavity or the surface. So this is the apical surface of the skin would be exposed to the air. The apical surface of the inside of the stomach would be exposed to the stomach acid inside the stomach. The basal surface is the lower side of the epithelial tissue, and it's what attaches the epithelial tissue to the underlying connective tissues. Epithelial tissue have specialized contacts. These are structures that basically link one epithelial cell to its neighboring epithelial cell. So by linking them together, they function as a sheet of cells, as opposed to individual cells. And this sheet of cells acts like a covering, just like a sheet of ceiling tiles can provide cover for ceiling, or a brick wall provides cover for a brick. They're connections between individual bricks to make it a wall or a covering. Some of these specialized contacts are called tight junctions and desmosomes. And this cartoon shows both tight junctions here and desmosomes there. Another characteristic of epithelial tissue is that they're supported by connective tissue. That means that they don't just float free in the body. They're bound and connected to connective tissue. Remember, connective tissue's purpose was support. so it supports epithelial tissue. The epithelial membrane, basal membrane, reinforces the epithelial sheet. It resists stretching and tearing, and it defines the boundary of the epithelium. Epithelial tissue is avascular but innervated. Avascular means there's no blood vessels in epithelial tissue, so it gets its nourishment from diffusion of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and minerals across the cell through the cell, as opposed to getting it from circulation or from blood supply. But it is innervated. Innervated means it's supplied by nerve fibers, so these have a lot of nerve fibers running through the epithelial tissue. Finally, the characteristic of epithelial tissue is significant for connective tissue support. All epithelial tissues are supported by connective tissue underneath. This is the final characteristic of epithelial tissue. Is that they have high regenerative capability. If the epithelial cells are exposed to damage, they usually are replaced rather quickly by other epithelial cells. Now, the naming convention for epithelial tissue follows two conditions. The epithelial tissue have two names. The first name has to do with how many layers of cells the epithelial tissue is. A simple epithelial is a single layer of cell thick. Stratified epithelial have two or more layers of cells. And you see in this cartoon, the simple epithelial, one layer cell thick, and then stratified epithelium has multiple layers of cells. The second name of the epithelial has to do with the shape of the cell. If it's flat or scale-like, it's called squamous. If it's a cube shape or box shape, it's cuboidal. If it's tall or like a column-like, it's called columnar. So when you put these together, we have different classifications of epithelial tissue. There's simple squamous epithelial, which is a single layer of flat cells. We have stratified squamous epithelium, which is multiple layers of flat cells. We have simple cuboidal epithelium, which is a single layer of cuboid-shaped epithelial tissue, epithelial cells. And then we have stratified cuboidal, which is more than one layer of cuboidal-shaped cells. We have simple columnar epithelium, which is a single layer of column-shaped cells. And we have stratified columnar epithelium, which is multiple layers of column-shaped cells. Now notice on this stratified cuboidal epithelium how the nucleuses are all in line, and on both, in this case it's two cell layer thick. It could be more in the body. This cartoon is just for diagram purposes. But compare this stratified columnar to this other category called pseudostratified. Pseudo means false, so if it's pseudostratified, it's not really stratified, it's falsely stratified. And the reason is that when you first look at this, it may give the appearance that there's multiple layers of cells because the nucleus is at different levels. Sometimes the nucleus is down by the basal membrane, sometimes the nucleus is up by the apical membrane. But yet there's only one. The cells are only one cell layer thick, so they're not stratified. They look stratified because of the nucleuses, so they're considered pseudostratified. And I'll show you a slide from a microscope that will illustrate that a little bit better, just a few slides down. Epithelial functions. It functions to absorb, to secrete, and to filter. Absorption would be like if this is just, imagine this is a sheet of epithelial cells, and inside on the apical surface is exposed to, let's say, the inside of the small intestines, for example. After a meal, the cells absorb the nutrients from the lumen of the intestines into the cell, and they take in the particles of protein, carbohydrates, and fat, particles, vitamins, and minerals, bring it in the cell, and it absorbs. Now, for secretion, assume this may be the epithelial of a hormone gland, like in the pancreas. It's an insulin secreting gland, and the cell produces insulin and then secretes that substance outward. So secretion is involving transport from within the cell to outside the cell, as opposed to absorption, which is transporting from outside the cell into the cell. And filtration is similar to absorption, except it transverses across from the apical surface through the cell to the basal surface. So it goes through the whole epithelial tissue. I'm not going to read all of these slides because you can read them yourself. I'll just kind of touch on some of the high points. Here's a microscope picture of simple squamous epithelium. Notice the cartoon on each of these pictures that shows the description, and the description has a cartoon which illustrates the epithelial tissue. This is simple squamous epithelium. It lists the function of the tissue and the location of the tissue. And it also shows a picture of a microscopic view of this tissue. So this will be helpful in comparing the different tissue types together. You'll need to be able to identify these tissue types and be able to identify, for example, something like this as a simple squamous epithelial tissue. Here's simple cuboidal epithelium. Again, the description. It's a layer of cube-like cells, single layer. Its function is secretion and absorption. It's found in the kidney tubules, ovary surface, portion of the small glands. And you see the picture here. It's a single layer of cells, that it's a cube-shaped cell. Like these cells are probably lining some sort of duct, or where they would secrete some substance, probably a hormone, into this inside of this tube here. The simple columnar epithelium is next. Again, there's a cartoon showing a simple single layer of column-shaped cells. Its function is absorption and secretion. The columnar epithelial cells have a few features that are somewhat unique. On the apical surface, you see this little fuzzy border here. This is called microvilli. These are like finger-like structures that stick out from the apical surface, and they increase the surface area of the apical membrane, so that if the cell is for absorbing absorbing nutrients from the small intestine, the increased surface area allows it to absorb more of the nutrients within the small intestines. So it just increases the surface area. The microvilli increase the surface area. Look at the pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue now. Again, here's the cartoon that shows the single layer, but the nucleus is at different levels, so it's pseudostratified. Now notice here on the picture here how it really looks like there's multiple layers here, because the cells are different sizes, different widths, and the nucleus is at different levels, so it really looks like there's multiple layers of cells. But if you look closely, you see each cell kind of goes from the basement membrane, and it goes all the way up to the apical membrane. Now this apical membrane here illustrates another feature that can be found on columnar epithelial, whether it's pseudostratified or stratified, and that's cilia. Now, a while ago I mentioned microvilli for increased surface area for absorption. Cilia has a different function altogether. Cilia are hair-like structures that serve to move liquid up and down across the epithelium. For example, this is the epithelium within the human trachea. This is going in the lung and respiratory pathway. The lungs produce a lot of mucus, and just as a matter of function, they produce mucus. And so when the mucus is expelled out from the lungs up to the throat to be coughed out through the cilia act like a transport system, which has waves of cilia that transport the mucus from. It's kind of push this mucus upward towards the trachea where it can be coughed up. we talk about stratified squamous epithelium. Again, the cartoon showing the multiple layers of cells, and then the microscopic picture showing the multiple layers of cells here. Notice the shape of the cells changes. Here on the basal membrane, the cells are larger, they're more cuboidal shaped, and as they get towards the surface, towards the apical surface, they flatten out, become flatter. That's why it's called stratified squamous epithelium as opposed to stratified cuboidal epithelium, because it has those stratified flat cells here, but it's also got cuboidal cells here. It gets the name based on the cells that are on the apical side, or apical surface of the epithelium. So since the apical cells are flat, it's called stratified squamous epithelium. And the way this is the epithelium found in the inside of the mucous membranes of the mouth or the nose, for example. And in the epithelials that are stratified, the basement membrane layer, or the lowest level of cells, is where the cells are formed. They grow here, and as the cells mature, they migrate towards the apical surface. As they migrate, they get further and further away from the blood supply, and so the cells basically in effect die. So by the time they get to the apical surface, the cells are pretty much dead, and are just husks of cells involving cell membranes, but they're packed tightly enough to make a waterproof barrier. The stratified squamous epithelium comes in two forms: it's keratinized and non-keratinized. Keratinized has this extra layer of keratin, which are just simply dead skin cells that are packed tightly, and they make a waterproof boundary. This is the kind of epithelium seen on the surface of the skin that's exposed to the air. As opposed to this non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, this is epithelium seen inside the mouth, inside the vagina, inside the nose, and basically moist mucous membranes, tissues, as opposed to tissues exposed to air. The stratified cuboidal epithelium and stratified columnar epithelium are very rare. I'm not really going to emphasize that in the lecture. Transitional epithelium is the last of the stratified epithelium, and this is, you see here it says multiple layers of cells, so this is obviously stratified. It's transitional because the cells change shape. Here they're actually they're smaller here on the bottom, and as they get towards apical surface, they get larger. The purpose of this type of epithelium is to allow stretching. This epithelium is what lines the inside of the bladder and inside of the ureters and the urethra, and so when the urine fills up the bladder and the urethra, it allows stretching to occur so that it can accommodate waiting till you have an opportune moment to go to the bathroom, so you don't have to urinate just at the first sign of any urine in the bladder. It allows the bladder to fill up and collect the urine, and the stretching allows for it to stretch without harm to the epithelium. Now, all this we've been talking about covering epithelial. The other type of epithelium we mentioned was glandular epithelium. A gland is basically a group of one or more cells that secretes a fluid called a secretion. Glands can be classified by the side of the production release. They can be endocrine glands or exocrine glands. Endo means inside or within. An endocrine gland secretes a substance inside the body, for example, a hormone. Hormones are secreted inside the bloodstream and travel through the bloodstream inside the body. An exocrine gland, exo means outside, that's an externally secreting gland, like a sweat gland. It secretes its substance to the external of the surface, external surface, like sweat glands. Glands can be categorized either unicellular or multicellular. Goblet cells, for example, are unicellular glands. The goblet cells are seen in the slide on stratified epithelium. Let me go back to that slide. Here's the goblet cell here. This is the pseudostratified columnar epithelium. These are goblet cells. This is a single-celled gland, basically. So again, just to re-emphasize, that endocrine glands secrete hormones, secrete their chemicals inside the bloodstream. The thing about this, they don't use a duct. A duct is something that's basically a tube that's used for a secretion to travel through from one place to another. So endocrine glands do not use ducts. They're ductless, as opposed to an exocrine gland, which does use a duct. Since exocrine glands are under the surface of the skin, and they have to connect to the outside of the skin, they connect through a duct, which is basically just a tube that allows the gland to reach the surface of the skin. And this would be an example for sweat glands. Sweat glands or duct or exocrine glands. Salivary glands would also be this type of gland. The gland that produces earwax would be a exocrine gland. But just remember, the exocrine glands use ducts to secrete the products. Endocrine glands do not use ducts. Here's a diagram, cartoon of exocrine gland that shows a duct. Again, I'm saying duct, D-U-C-T, not D-U-C-K, but D-U-C-T, duct, to transport the secretions from inside the gland to the external surface. As opposed to endocrine gland, which secretes its secretions right directly into the bloodstream. Here's again these unicellular, single-celled exocrine glands, mucous cells, goblet cells. This is the same picture I showed earlier for the pseudostratified epithelium. The goblet cells is located in there. It's basically a single-celled gland. All these glands produce mucin. Mucin is basically a sugar protein that dissolves in water to form a mucus, slimy, protective coating. Glands can be categorized by their cellular structure. A simple gland has unbranched ducts. Okay, think of an unbranched like a tree without limbs. A compound gland has branched ducts, like branches of a tree. A tubular gland, the cells form a duct. In alveolar glands, the cells form a sac. Tubuloalveolar glands, they have both sac and the duct. And I'll show you a picture of that next. This is tubular glands. See the tube-shaped gland? As opposed to alveolar, which is a sac shape. And this also illustrates the difference in simple, non-branched, simple, branched, and the compound, tubular, compound alveolar. And this is tubuloalveolar. It has both alveoli and tubes as well as alveolar in it. The last way to distinguish the glands is by the mode of secretion. The merocrine glands are glands that secrete the products by exocytosis. This is a process in which the gland produces a secretion, and then that secretion is in a vesicle within the gland, and it's exposed to the surface of the gland, and then it's released through the process of excitosis into the space of the duct or into the bloodstream. As opposed to holocrine glands, which accumulate the products till they get a build enough pressure and they rupture. And then once they rupture, then they secrete the secretions are secreted into the surrounding tissues or duct or bloodstream. On the next lecture, we'll pick up and discuss connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue.